You've seen war movies. You think you know what combat is like. You don't, not even close. The movies show you a moment of hesitation. Maybe the hero swallows hard. Maybe his jaw tightens, and then he squares his shoulders and charges forward. Eyes clear, hands steady, courage burning like a clean flame in his chest. That's the story they sell you. The fearless warrior, the man whose nerve never breaks. Let me tell you what I've seen. Anzio Beachhead, 1944. 4 months pinned on a strip of Italian coastline while German artillery had every inch registered. The 88 seconds came screaming in with maybe 2 seconds warning, just enough time to know you might be about to die, not enough time to do much about it. The big stuff, the railway guns they called Anzio Annie, you could hear coming from miles away, this deep rumbling whistle that gave you plenty of time to think about what was coming, plenty of time to feel your guts turn to water. You want to know what men looked like before an assault? They vomited. They shook so hard they couldn't light a cigarette. Some of them couldn't meet each other's eyes. Some of them prayed, and some of them cursed, and some of them just went quiet and stared at nothing. Every single one of them was afraid. That's the part the movies leave out. Not the gunfire, not the explosions. They get those right, more or less. What they leave out is the fear. The cold hand that reaches into your gut and squeezes until you can't breathe right. The terror that doesn't go away when the shooting starts, it just changes shape. The knowledge, bone deep and inescapable, that you might be dead in the next 10 seconds and there's not a damn thing your courage can do about it. Here's the thing about fear that civilians don't understand. It's not a moment. It's not something you feel and then push through and then it's gone. Fear in combat is a condition. It's the air you breathe. It's there when you wake up, and it's there when you try to sleep, and it's there in every second in between. You don't overcome it. You don't defeat it. You just learn to function while it's eating you alive. The myth says brave men don't feel this. The myth says real soldiers, the good ones, the heroes, somehow transcend the trembling that afflicts ordinary people. They find calm where others find chaos. Their hands are steady when lesser men shake. That myth is garbage. Every man is afraid, every single one. The soldiers who say otherwise are either liars trying to impress you or fools who haven't been tested yet. I've seen men who won medals for valor crying in their foxholes between firefights. I've seen men who charged machine guns throw up before and after. The difference between the brave and the coward isn't what they feel, it's what they do with what they feel. But here's what makes this myth dangerous. Not just wrong. When young men believe it, when they go to war expecting their courage to make the fear disappear, they're set up to fail in the worst possible way. They feel the terror hit them and they think something's wrong. They think they're cowards. They waste precious seconds, precious energy, trying to force themselves to feel something they were never going to feel. And while they're fighting that internal battle, the external one keeps going. The shells keep falling. The enemy keeps shooting. And men die confused, wondering why they couldn't be the heroes they saw in the movies. The fearless warrior never existed. He's a story we tell to make war palatable, to make sacrifice seem clean and noble instead of terrifying and necessary. The story serves the people who send men to fight but never go themselves. It serves the recruiters and the politicians and the screenwriters. It makes for better posters and better parades. It does not serve the infantry. The infantry, those of us who actually lived in foxholes and watched friends die and learned what artillery sounds like when it's trying to find you, we know the truth. We know that courage isn't the absence of fear. We know that every man who fought was scared, that the shaking hands and the racing hearts and the cold sweat were as universal as the mud and the hunger and the exhaustion. We know because we lived it. So if the fearless warrior never existed, how did anyone survive? How did men function under fire for months at a time? The myth says courage, but the myth is a lie. So what's the truth? The truth is stranger than the lie, and more useful. Picture two soldiers in the same foxhole, under the same shell fire. The first one grips his rifle so hard his knuckles have gone white. His jaw is clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He's breathing in shallow gasps, fighting to control the terror that's surging through him. Every explosion makes him flinch. His eyes are wild, jumping from shadow to shadow. He's exhausted, and the bombardment's only been going on for 10 minutes. The second soldier is just as scared. His heart is pounding just as hard. The same cold hand is squeezing his guts, but something's different. His grip on his rifle is firm, not strangling. He's breathing deliberately, not calmly, because you can't be calm under shell fire, but with rhythm, with purpose. When a round lands close, he flinches, assesses, and goes back to watching his sector. He's scared. He's functioning. Same situation, same fear, completely different outcomes. What's the difference? The first soldier is fighting two wars at once. He's fighting the Germans in front of him, and he's fighting the fear inside him. Every ounce of energy he spends trying to suppress the terror, trying to force himself to feel brave, trying to live up to the myth, that's energy he's not spending on survival. He's swimming against the current and holding himself underwater at the same time. He's drowning. The second soldier figured something out. Maybe it took him one firefight, maybe it took him a dozen. But somewhere along the line, he stopped fighting his own body. He accepted that the fear wasn't going away. He stopped expecting his courage to make him feel different and started working with what he actually felt. That's the difference. Not courage versus cowardice, acceptance versus resistance. Here's the thing about fear that the myth doesn't want you to know. Your body doesn't take orders from your willpower. The moment your brain registers mortal threat, real mortal threat, not movie danger, but the actual possibility that the next second might be your last, a cascade of chemistry floods your system that you have no more control over than you have control over your heartbeat. Adrenaline dumps into your blood, cortisol spikes, your heart rate jumps, your pupils dilate, blood rushes away from your extremities and toward your core organs. That's why your hands go cold. Your bowels loosen, your mouth goes dry. Every system in your body shifts to survival mode, and it happens faster than you can think. This isn't weakness. This is biology. This is millions of years of evolution doing exactly what it evolved to do when a predator is trying to kill you. Your great-great ancestors, 1,000 generations of them, survived because their bodies reacted this way. The ones whose bodies didn't react this way got eaten. You don't override that with willpower. You don't overcome that with courage. The man who tells you he felt calm under fire is either lying or he wasn't really in danger. So what happens when you believe the myth? What happens when you go into combat expecting to feel brave, expecting your training to kick in and your fear to disappear? You feel the terror hit you like a freight train, and you think you're broken. You think something's wrong with you. You think you're a coward while everyone else is somehow managing to be brave. You look at the men around you and you assume they feel different than you do, because that's what the myth told you, that real soldiers don't shake, don't want to run, don't feel the cold hand squeezing their insides. And here's where it gets dangerous. You start fighting the fear. You clench down. You try to suppress it, to will it away, to force your body to feel something it was never going to feel. And that fight, that internal war, costs you everything. Every ounce of energy you spend fighting your own body is energy you're not spending on situational awareness. It's energy you're not spending on making decisions. It's energy you're not spending on staying alive. The myth sets you up for an internal battle that drains exactly the resources you need most. Worse, there's a spiral. Fear creates shame in men who think they shouldn't feel it. Shame creates tension. Tension amplifies fear. The harder you try to be brave in the movie sense, the calm, the steady, the unshaken, the worse you feel. It's a death spiral that starts with believing a lie about what courage is. The men who cracked at Anzio, and men did crack, plenty of them, weren't the weak ones. Often they were the tough guys, the ones who swaggered before combat, the ones who talked big about giving the crowds hell. They cracked because reality didn't match their self-image. They expected to feel like heroes, and instead they felt like terrified animals, and the gap between expectation and reality broke something in them. Meanwhile, some quiet kid from Iowa who'd never thrown a punch in his life would keep functioning. Not because he was braver, because he'd never told himself a story about being fearless. He accepted that he was scared, and he got on with the job. The breakthrough comes when you stop trying to eliminate the fear and accept it as part of the job. It feels like defeat at first, like giving up, like admitting you're not the soldier you wanted to be. Later, you realize it was the beginning of survival. So if fighting fear doesn't work, if the myth actively gets men killed, what replaces it? What is fear, really, when you stop treating it as the enemy? Here's what actually happens. Here's what the myth obscures and the movies ignore and most civilians will never understand. Fear is not your enemy. Fear is your intelligence system. When you stop fighting it and start listening, really listening, not to the voice in your head but to the sensations in your body, you discover something remarkable. Fear has gradations. It's not one thing. It's a spectrum, and each point on that spectrum tells you something specific about your situation. There's the low-level anxiety that's always present in a combat zone, that background hum of alertness that never quite goes away, even when you're eating or trying to sleep. That's your body telling you, danger exists here, stay ready. Then there's the spike when shells start falling or gunfire breaks out nearby. Sharper, more insistent. Your body telling you, the danger is closer now, the threat is immediate. And then there's the ice-cold certainty that hits you when you know, really know, that the next few seconds will determine whether you live or die. When the artillery is walking toward your position and you can hear it getting closer, round by round. When you're pinned down and the enemy is maneuvering on you and there's nowhere left to go. These aren't just emotions, they're data. Your body is telling you exactly how dangerous your situation is, with a precision your conscious mind can't match. The men who survived learned to read this data. They learned to trust it. Let me show you what this looks like in practice. A German 88 round has about a 2-second flight time from gun to impact at typical ranges. 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, a man who's fighting his fear, trying to think, trying to remember his training, trying to calm himself down, might just stand there. His conscious mind is working, but conscious thought is too slow. By the time he decides what to do, he's dead. A man who's learned to use his fear moves without deciding. His body hears the whistle, recognizes the threat, and hits the dirt before his conscious mind has finished processing the sound. He's not thinking, he's reacting, and his reaction is powered by fear. The fear isn't slowing him down, the fear is what moved him. That's the secret. That's what the veterans knew that the replacements didn't. Fear, properly channeled, doesn't degrade performance. It enhances it. The racing heart that feels like panic, that's extra oxygen flooding your muscles. The hyper-alert senses that feel overwhelming, that's your body giving you more data to work with. The narrowed focus that feels like tunnel vision, that's your brain cutting away everything that doesn't matter so you can concentrate on what does. Evolution gave us fear for the same reason it gave us pain, to keep us alive. Pain tells you something is wrong with your body. Fear tells you something is wrong with your situation. Both are information. Both are trying to help you. At Anzio, you could tell the veterans from the replacements without asking. The replacements were stiff, their movements jerky and uncertain. They looked around constantly, but they saw nothing. Too much input. No way to process it. Fear drowning out everything useful. They were fighting their bodies and losing. The veterans moved different, loose, economical. They weren't less afraid. They were differently afraid. Their fear had become their radar. They heard things the replacements missed because terror had tuned their hearing to threat detection frequencies. They saw things the replacements didn't notice because fear had widened their peripheral vision, sharpened their edge detection, made them hyper-aware of anything that moved. They didn't look calm. Calm is a lie, but they functioned. That's the difference. Picture two men sharing a foxhole. One is gripping his rifle so hard his hands ache, jaw clenched, breathing in shallow gasps. Every sound makes him flinch. He can't hold a conversation. His eyes are wild, seeing threats everywhere and nowhere. The other man is just as afraid, but he's channeled it differently. His grip is firm, not strangling. He's breathing deliberately, not to calm himself down, because you can't calm yourself down under shellfire, but to give his fear something to organize around. When a round lands close, he flinches, assesses the direction and distance, and returns to watching his sector. Both men are terrified. One is being used by his fear, the other is using it. When fear spikes for no apparent reason, when something feels wrong but you can't point to why, trust it. Move, duck, change position. Your body noticed something your conscious mind missed. A shadow that moved wrong, a sound that didn't fit, a pattern that broke. Your fear processed it before you could think about it. The men who survived trusted their gut. The men who died often had the same instinct and ignored it, because they'd been taught that fear was weakness, that they should push through it, that courage meant not listening to the alarm bells ringing in their heads. The alarm bells were trying to save their lives. So yes, fear is information. Fear is your body telling you the truth about your situation. The question isn't how to get rid of it. The question is how to use what it's telling you. But here's what nobody mentions. Here's the part that comes next, that explains both the power and the cost. Fear isn't just information. Fear is fuel, and fuel has to be burned. Let me tell you something about fear that nobody wants to hear. Fear is fuel, real fuel. The same adrenaline that makes your hands shake is the same chemical that quickens your reflexes. The same cortisol that makes you nauseous is the same hormone that sharpens your focus. You can't separate the discomfort from the benefit. They're the same thing. The men who learned to use fear didn't eliminate the shaking and the nausea. They channeled the energy those sensations signaled. They stopped fighting the wave and started riding it. But here's what the enthusiasm for fear as fuel leaves out. You can't run that hot for long without burning something out. The body isn't designed to sustain combat-level fear for hours, let alone days or weeks. The reserves being drawn on don't replenish easily. Some of it never comes back. That's the trade. That's always the trade. War takes something from you, and you don't get it back. Let me show you how this works. Watch a man in his first firefight. He's fighting his body, trying to stop the shaking, trying to think through the noise, trying to remember his training while every instinct screams at him to run. His fear is working against him because he doesn't know what to do with it. Now watch the same man in his fourth firefight. Something has shifted. He's not less afraid. If anything, he knows better now what he has to be afraid of, but the fear flows differently. It moves through him toward action instead of pooling into paralysis. He's learned to stop fighting the current and start swimming with it. By his 10th firefight, if he lasts that long, he's operating at a level he couldn't have achieved in any other state. Decisions in fractions of seconds that would take minutes to calculate consciously. Movements that seem automatic but are actually fear-fueled hyper-awareness doing its job. He's riding the wave. The terror is still there, but it's working for him instead of against him. This is what fear does when you stop fighting it. This is the mechanism that separates functioning from breaking. But look at his eyes. Something has changed behind them. Something has been used up. The chemistry lesson is simple enough. Adrenaline dilates your pupils. That's why everything seems brighter and sharper under fire. It quickens your reflexes. That's why you can move faster than you thought possible. It sends blood to your major muscle groups. That's why you feel stronger, even while you feel terrified. Cortisol burns away unnecessary thoughts. All the things you usually worry about. Did you leave the stove on? Does that girl like you? What are you going to do after the war? Gone. Erased. Nothing exists except the present moment, the immediate threat, the next 3 seconds of survival. That narrowed focus isn't panic, it's priority. The shaking hands and racing heart that feel like malfunction, they are the mechanism, the body survival system at full throttle. So the question isn't whether to feel afraid, the question is whether to fight it or ride it. Every instinct says to calm down. Every message from back home, every training manual, every image from every movie tells you that you should be trying to control this, to suppress it, to achieve some state of calm focus that lets you operate without the interference of fear. That's exactly backward. The breakthrough comes when you stop trying to calm down and start letting the fear flow through you toward action. You're not going to feel calm. You're going to feel terrified. But you can be terrified and effective at the same time. That's the secret. That's what the veterans learned that the replacements had to figure out if they lived long enough. Men operating at fear fuel levels achieve things they couldn't in any other state. I've seen men run faster than they could on a training field. I've seen men spot threats they couldn't have consciously perceived. I've seen decisions made in the time it takes to blink. Good decisions. Decisions that save lives. Made by terrified men operating on something beyond conscious thought. That's what fear does when you let it work. But, and this is the part nobody wants to talk about, you can't sustain it. The body isn't built for this. 30 days of continuous combat and men start to deteriorate. 45 days and they're approaching a vegetative state. That's not cowardice. That's physiology. The men at Anzio who learned to use their fear were drawing on reserves that don't replenish easily. Every time you burn that fuel, every time you ride that wave of terror to heighten performance, you're burning part of yourself that you don't get back. At least not all of it. At least not soon. And here's the part that connects to everything that comes after. The system that saves your life in combat doesn't just switch off when the danger passes. You're training your nervous system for war. You're teaching your body that vigilance equals survival, that terror is fuel, that the heightened state is how you stay alive. That training doesn't disappear when you ship home. That programming doesn't reverse because someone signed a peace treaty. The cost of using fear as fuel is paid later, in ways you can't predict and can't refuse. That's the trade. That's always the trade. So now you understand the mechanism. Fear as fuel that enables superhuman performance, but at a cost that compounds over time. The brave weren't feeling less. They were burning hotter. What happens when the war ends but the mechanism keeps running? Here's what the medals don't tell you. Here's what the welcome home parades never show. When you train yourself to use fear as fuel, to stay hyper alert, to trust the spike of terror that tells you danger is close, to ride the wave instead of fighting it, you're programming your nervous system for war. You're teaching your body a lesson it will never forget. The veteran who can't tolerate crowds. The veteran who can't sit with his back to a door. The veteran who wakes at every sound, who flinches at car backfires, who scans the rooftops in his own hometown on a sunny afternoon. He's not broken. He trained himself to be that way. He trained himself because being that way kept him alive. In a foxhole at Anzio, hypervigilance wasn't a disorder. It was a survival skill. Scanning for threats, flinching at sudden sounds, staying alert even when you're exhausted, that's how you make it through. That's how you don't get killed by the thing you didn't notice. The problem is, you don't undo that training. You can't unsharpen senses you sharpen for survival. The body doesn't know the war is over. The body learned that vigilance equals survival. And it's not about to unlearn that lesson just because someone signed a piece of paper in Europe. Picture a veteran, years after the war, decades even. He's lying in bed at 3 a.m. He sleeps with a light on, always has ever since he came back. Darkness feels like danger. His wife doesn't understand why, and he can't explain it in a way that makes sense to someone who wasn't there. A sound, maybe nothing, a branch against a window, a car door closing down the street, but his body doesn't care what it actually was. The system fires. Heart pounding, senses straining, fear flooding him just like it did under shell fire all those years ago. For a few seconds, he's not in his bedroom. He's back there. Then slowly, breath by breath, he returns. He remembers where he is. He tells himself he's safe. His mind knows the truth. But his heart takes longer to remember. His body holds on to the fear for long minutes after his thoughts have let it go. This isn't damage. This is the system working exactly as trained. The hypervigilance that torments him now is the same hypervigilance that brought him home. The heightened startle response that makes him flinch at fireworks is the same response that made him hit the dirt when shells were incoming. The inability to relax in crowds is the same alertness that kept him from being surprised by enemy movement. These were features. Now they're features running without purpose. That's the thing nobody tells you about combat. The skills you develop to survive don't turn off when you don't need them anymore. They don't distinguish between real danger and reminder of danger. A car backfire sounds enough like a gunshot. Fireworks look enough like explosions. A crowded street has enough angles of approach, enough faces to scan, enough potential threats to assess. The body doesn't care that it's peacetime. The body remembers what kept it alive. And here's the cruelest part. The fear still comes, but now it has nowhere to go. In combat, fear was useful because it had a target, a direction to move, an enemy to fight, an action to take. The terror fueled something. It powered survival. In peacetime, the fear has no outlet. It rises up and there's nothing to do with it. No enemy to fight, no action that will make it useful. It just burns and burns with nowhere to go, and the veteran is left trying to manage a fire that was built for a purpose that no longer exists. Some nights, they're back in the foxhole. The dreams are vivid, more than memories, less than reality, but close enough that the body responds as if it were real. The same chemistry, the same racing heart, the same cold hand in the gut. They wake up sweating, sometimes shouting, always afraid. And there's no enemy to fight, no shell to dodge, nothing to do with the terror except wait for it to pass. The fear that saved their lives becomes the fear that haunts them. That's the trade. That's always the trade. How do you explain this to someone who wasn't there? How do you tell your wife, your children, your neighbors, the people who knew you before you went, and expect to find the same person when you come back, that the machinery is still running, that the fear doesn't go away, you just learn to live beside it? That part of you is still in that foxhole, scanning for threats, waiting for incoming rounds, running survival calculations on every situation, even when you know that you're safe. Most veterans don't try to explain. It's easier to just manage it quietly, to develop little routines that keep the system from firing unnecessarily, to avoid the situations that trigger the old responses. Easier to sit with your back to the wall without explaining why. Easier to skip the fireworks show without getting into what they remind you of. Easier to carry it alone than to try to make someone understand something they never lived. This isn't something you recover from. It's something you learn to live with. The system doesn't turn off. You just get better at recognizing when it's misfiring, at talking yourself down, at waiting out the false alarms. Some people call this broken. I call it the cost of survival. The mechanism that saved them becomes the mechanism they carry. The fear they learn to use becomes the fear they can't stop feeling. The heightened state that kept them alive in combat keeps running in peacetime, with no enemy left to fight, no way to turn it off. That's not weakness. That's what survival looks like. And if we're going to ask men to learn these lessons, to train their bodies for war, to become the kind of creature that uses fear as fuel, we owe them the understanding of what that costs. Not just in the moment of danger, but in all the moments after. We owe them that much. So now you know the truth about fear. Now you understand that every soldier feels it, that fighting it makes things worse, that the men who survived learn to use it as fuel. You've seen how the mechanism works and what it costs. Now let me tell you what this means for everything you thought you knew about courage. Courage was never what we thought it was. Not the absence of fear, not the suppression of fear, not some mystical quality that allows certain men to feel calm when they should be terrified. Courage is fear functioning correctly. Let that sink in for a moment. Every heroic act you've ever heard about, every medal ever awarded, every story of men running toward danger instead of away from it, inside those men, fear was raging. Hearts pounding, hands wanting to shake, every instinct screaming to run. The difference wasn't that they felt less. The difference was what they did with what they felt. When you see a man charging a machine gun nest, you're not seeing fearlessness. You're seeing fear so sharpened, so focused, so thoroughly channeled that danger reads as solvable problem rather than paralyzing threat. His terror has so heightened his awareness that he can see the angles, calculate the timing, find the path through the bullets. He's not calm, he's terrified, but his terror is working for him instead of against him. Same fear as the man who froze, different channel. This changes everything we thought we knew about heroism. The brave weren't special in the way we imagined. They weren't made of different stuff. They didn't have some quality the rest of us lack. They were scared out of their minds, just like everyone else, and they found a way to use it. That's not less impressive than the myth. It's more. Think about it. Which takes more courage, a man who genuinely feels nothing running into danger, or a man who feels everything and runs anyway? The fearless man, if such a creature existed, would just be doing what came naturally. No struggle, no battle, no triumph over anything. He'd be following his instincts, same as the rest of us. But the man who feels the terror, who feels every cell in his body screaming to flee, who has to work against every instinct evolution gave him, and does it anyway, that's the real story. That's what actually happened in every heroic moment the history books record. The veterans understood this. Not always in words they could articulate, but in their bones they knew. Courage wasn't about feeling less. It was about doing more with what you felt. Their nervous systems figured out what their conscious minds might never have explained. Survival selected for men who could ride the fear. And here's what that means for how we honor them. When we call a soldier fearless, when we imagine him as steady-eyed and calm while death flew around him, we're not praising him. We're erasing him. We're denying the actual experience he had, the terror he transformed, the real courage it took to function while feeling what he felt. The myth of fearlessness was always an insult disguised as honor. The truth honors them more. The truth says, these men were scared every single day. They shook, they sweated, they felt the cold hand squeezing their insides, and they fought anyway. They did their jobs anyway. They saved their friends anyway. That's not a lesser story than the myth. That's a greater one. Picture the veteran who seems calm under fire, the one people point to as proof that some men really don't feel it. Watch him from outside and you'd swear he was untroubled. Steady movements, focused attention, none of the wild-eyed panic of the replacements around him. But inside, his heart is racing just as fast as theirs. His body is flooded with the same chemistry, adrenaline, cortisol, all of it. The same fear is coursing through him. The only difference is invisible. He's using what's coursing through him instead of fighting it. What looks like fearlessness from outside is actually fear at peak function. The calm exterior masks an internal storm being productively directed. Every soldier who survived sustained combat learned some version of this truth, whether they could put it into words or not. Anzio, the Bulge, Normandy, the Pacific Islands, different places, different enemies, same lesson. Their bodies figured out what their minds never had to understand. Survival selected for the fear riders. Now think about what this means for how we see them when they come home. The man at the parade, smiling and waving while people thank him for his service, he learned something about fear that most people will never have to learn. He transformed terror into function. He used his body's panic response as fuel for survival. He did something with his fear that took everything he had. And then he came home. And the mechanism that saved him didn't stop running. If courage is channeled fear, and it is, then the veteran's courage isn't something that happened once and then ended. It's something that's still happening. Every time he manages a startle response, every time he talks himself down from a false alarm, every time he functions in a world that doesn't understand what's still running inside him, that's courage too. He's still doing something with his fear. He's just doing it without an enemy to fight. We owe him better than the myth. We owe him understanding. Let me show you something about the gap between how civilians see veterans and how veterans experience themselves. Because this is where understanding fear as fuel changes everything. Picture a parade for returning soldiers, flags waving, crowds cheering, grateful civilians lining the streets, reaching out to shake hands, calling out thanks and praise. From the outside, it's a triumph, a celebration, a hero's welcome. Now watch one veteran in particular. Watch his eyes. He's not experiencing triumph, he's managing a threat response. Too many people, too many angles, too much input. The system that saved his life in combat is treating this parade like a tactical situation. It's scanning the rooftops, tracking movements in the crowd, running threat assessments on every face, every shadow, every sudden motion. He smiles, he waves. He shakes hands with the people who reach for him. But inside, he's working hard, harder than anyone watching can see. He's trying to keep the machine from running at full combat speed. He's trying to enjoy this moment while a part of him that doesn't take orders keeps screaming that crowds are dangerous, that this much input means something bad is about to happen, that he needs to find cover and identify exits and stay ready. His body hasn't learned the war is over. His body may never learn. What civilians experience as celebration, veterans often experience as overwhelm. The same hyper-awareness that kept them alive, that widened their peripheral vision, that tuned their hearing to threat frequencies, that made them notice everything, now makes a sunny parade feel like sensory assault. There's no threat here, they know that, but knowing doesn't turn off the machine. People thank him for his service. They call him a hero. They mean it kindly, and he accepts it gracefully. But there's a gap between their perception and his experience that neither of them has words for. They see a soldier who served nobly and came home. He experiences a system still running, fear still burning, a body still primed for dangers that no longer exist. They see resolution. He lives with continuation. This is the gap we owe them, the dignity of understanding. When veterans seem distant or uncomfortable with praise, it's often not modesty, though sometimes it is. Often it's that they're still operating in a mode we don't have vocabulary for. They're managing something while accepting your thanks. They're working to keep the machine in check while smiling for the cameras. And here's what makes the gap wider. They often can't explain it. How do you tell someone who wasn't there that the fear doesn't go away? That years later, decades later, a crowded street still triggers the same hypervigilance that once kept you alive. That gratitude feels hollow when it's aimed at a version of you that doesn't exist, the fearless hero, the man who served and moved on, the soldier whose war ended when the shooting stopped. The war didn't end. The machine keeps running. That's the truth behind every awkward pause when someone says, "Thank you for your service," and the veteran doesn't quite know how to respond. Some veterans beam when you thank them. They've made peace with it somehow, or they've learned to accept praise gracefully, or their machine runs quieter than others. Good for them, I mean that. But others look away, nod curtly, change the subject. The second group isn't ungrateful. They're managing the gap between your perception and their experience. They're being thanked for something you don't understand by someone who sees them as something they don't feel. The myth of the fearless warrior creates this gap. If we believe the truth, that soldiers are scared men who learn to use their fear, we'd understand that the skill doesn't turn off. We'd understand that the hero we're thanking is still working, still managing, still carrying something we can't see. Calling someone a hero when you don't understand what they went through isn't true honor. It's comfortable distance. It lets us feel good about ourselves we remembered to say thanks, without having to think about what we're thanking them for. Real honor requires understanding. Real honor means knowing that the veteran at the parade might be fighting a quieter battle right in front of you. Real honor means seeing them as they are, not as the myth says they should be. The next time you thank a veteran for their service, notice their response. Really notice. If they seem uncomfortable, consider that you might be witnessing something. Not rudeness, not false modesty, but the gap between a myth and a truth. They lived the truth. They deserve to be seen for it. What do they actually carry? What is this weight that comes home with them and stays long after the shooting stops? Let me tell you about the fear that never leaves. The fear that saved their lives becomes the fear that haunts them. That's the trade. That's always the trade. And there's no way around it, no technique that avoids it, no amount of courage that exempts you from the cost. The same terror that sharpened senses and quickened reflexes and transformed panic into precision, it doesn't stop because the danger stopped. The body doesn't know the war is over. The body remembers what kept it alive, and it keeps doing it. Some nights they're back in the foxhole. The dreams come vivid and real, more than memories, and the body responds as if the danger were happening now. The same racing heart, the same cold hand in the gut, the same fear, as real as it ever was, flooding the system with chemistry designed to keep them alive. But there's no enemy to fight, no shell to dodge, no action to take. The fear just burns and burns with nowhere to go. A veteran wakes at 3 a.m. A sound, maybe nothing, maybe a branch against the window, maybe a car door closing down the street. His conscious mind barely registers it. But his body doesn't wait for conscious processing. The machine fires before he's fully awake. Heart pounding, senses straining, fear flooding him like it did under shell fire all those years ago. For a few seconds he's not in his bedroom. He's back there, wherever there was. The foxhole, the hedgerow, the bombed-out building where he learned what incoming rounds sound like. Then slowly, breath by breath, he returns to the present. He remembers where he is. He tells himself he's safe. His wife is beside him, sleeping peaceful. No idea what just happened in his nervous system. He knows he's safe. His body takes longer to believe it. This is what fear as fuel looks like in peacetime. The machine that saved him has no off switch. Almost anything can trigger the old response. Sounds that resemble gunfire, crowds that feel like tactical situations, sudden movements in peripheral vision, smells that take him back, cordite, diesel, that particular kind of dust. The body doesn't distinguish between real danger and reminder of danger. It learned a lesson about survival, and it keeps applying that lesson whether it's needed or not. In combat, fear was useful because it had a purpose. There was an enemy to fight, an action to take, a direction to channel the terror. The fuel powered something. It made you faster, sharper, more alive than you'd ever been. In peacetime, the fear has no purpose. It rises up in response to triggers that aren't threats, floods the system with chemistry designed for survival, and there's nothing to do with it. No target, no outlet. The fuel burns, but it powers nothing except misery. How do you explain this to someone who wasn't there? How do you tell your wife that you can't watch fireworks because they sound too much like something that ended 30 years ago? How do you explain to your children that you sit with your back to the wall in restaurants, not because you're paranoid, but because part of you is still fighting a war they've only read about in books? How do you make someone understand that the fear doesn't go away? You just learn to live beside it. That the machinery that brought you home keeps running because it doesn't know the war is over. Most veterans don't try. It's easier to just manage it quietly, to develop routines that keep the system from firing unnecessarily, to avoid situations that trigger the old responses without explaining why, to carry it alone rather than try to translate something that has no civilian equivalent. People think time heals. People think you get over war eventually, that the memories fade, that the body calms down. People think therapy can fix what combat created. The truth is harder. You can manage. You can adapt. You can build a life around it. Learn your triggers. Develop strategies for talking yourself down when the false alarms fire. You can get better at recognizing when the machine is running unnecessarily and waiting it out. You can find ways to live with the system still running at combat speed in a world that doesn't require it. But the system doesn't turn off. The fear doesn't leave. The machine that saved you becomes the machine you carry, and you carry it forever. This isn't something you recover from. It's something you learn to live with. That's the cost of using fear as fuel. That's the trade they made, whether they understood it at the time or not. The terror that kept them alive in the worst moments of their lives stays with them in all the moments after. And if we're going to truly honor them, not with myths and parades and comfortable distance, but with real understanding, we need to know what they carry. We owe them the truth, not the comfortable lie about fearless heroes who served nobly and moved on with their lives, not the myth that makes war palatable and sacrifice seem clean, not the version that lets us feel good about thanking them without having to understand what we're thanking them for. The truth. Men who were scared every single day. Men who felt the cold hand squeezing their guts, who shook, who sweated, who vomited before assaults and couldn't sleep after. Men who learned the hard way, the only way, to make their terror useful, to channel panic into precision, to ride the wave instead of drowning in it. Men who paid for that learning in ways they're still paying. That's what we owe them, understanding, real understanding, not comfortable mythology. the dignity of being seen for what they actually went through, not praised for a version of events that never happened. Picture a young man in a foxhole at Anzio. He's learning something about fear that he never wanted to know, learning to ride it instead of fight it, learning to use his body's panic response as fuel for survival. He's being transformed by war, not into a fearless hero, but into something harder to celebrate, a terrified man who functions anyway. Now picture that same man decades later, still carrying what he learned, still sleeping light, still scanning rooms for exits before he'll sit down, still managing a machine that runs at combat speed in a world that's been at peace for longer than the war lasted. The young man and the old man are the same mechanism, the same survival learning, the same rewired nervous system, the same fear that once saved his life, now burning without purpose. The only difference is the presence or absence of actual threat. We owe them both. We owe the young man the truth about what combat will cost him, not to discourage him, but to prepare him. We owe him honesty instead of myths. We owe him the understanding that fear is coming and it won't feel like the movies, and his job isn't to eliminate it, but to use it. We owe the old man the dignity of being seen. We owe him recognition that what he carries isn't damage. It's the cost of survival. We owe him better than pity, better than the assumption that he's broken, better than the comfortable distance of thank you for your service delivered without comprehension. And we owe ourselves the weight of this understanding when we talk about war. Every decision to send men into combat is a decision to create this, to train young bodies to use fear as fuel, to rewire nervous systems for survival in conditions most people will never face. Every casual conversation about military action, every glib statement about national interest, every political debate that treats war as abstraction, underneath all of it, this is what we're really talking about. Men who will learn what fear really is, who will pay for that learning forever. The next time someone speaks casually about military force, remember what you learned here. Remember what we're asking men to do. We're asking them to transform themselves into something that will carry the war inside them long after the war ends. We're asking them to burn fuel that doesn't replenish. We're asking them to make a trade, survival for permanence, function for peace, that they can never undo. That's not a small thing. That's not something anyone should discuss lightly. We owe them the weight of that understanding. And when you see a veteran, really see one. Not the parade version, but the real man carrying what he carries. Remember what you now know. When he flinches at a sound, that's fear still working. When he scans a room before sitting down, that's the machinery that brought him home. When he seems distant in crowds or uncomfortable with praise, that's the gap between what he lived and what we imagine. He's not broken. He's adapted for conditions most people will never face. He learned to use his fear as fuel, and it saved his life, and now it won't stop burning. That's not damage, that's survival. Fear isn't weakness, never was. Fear is the most sophisticated survival system evolution ever created. Millions of years of development tuned to keep you alive exactly when death is closest. The racing heart, the sharpened senses, the narrowed focus, all of it designed to give you your best chance when your life depends on the next few seconds. The men who learned to use it did something most people never have to do. They transformed terror into awareness, panic into precision. They took the thing that was trying to save them and learned to let it. And then they came home, carrying a system still running at combat speed, with no enemy left to fight and no way to turn it off. That's not damage. That's the cost of survival. The myth of the fearless warrior was comfortable. It let us honor soldiers without understanding them, celebrate courage without knowing what it actually was. It let us put them on posters and in parades and thank them for something we never had to comprehend. Now you know. You know that every soldier is afraid, that the brave and the decorated and the legendary, all of them felt the cold hand, all of them shook, all of them wondered if they could do what they had to do. You know that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the use of it. You know that survival has a cost, paid in ways that don't show up on medals or in citations. We owe them the truth. Not the comfortable lie about fearless heroes. The truth about scared men who learned to make their terror useful. Men who paid for that learning in ways they're still paying. The next time you see a veteran flinch at a sound, or scan a room before you'll sit down, or leave a crowd because something doesn't feel right, remember what you learned here. That's fear still working. That's the machinery that brought him home. That's survival, still running. We owe them the dignity of understanding. Fear isn't the enemy, never was. The only enemy is the lie that says it should be.